Okay, folks, let's go ahead and get it started. So, today's live stream, I'm back from holiday or vacation, whatever you want to call it. Vacations aren't usually for me, by the way. I usually, my wife enjoys them. Other members of my family enjoy vacations. For me, vacations are always a hassle. It's like I prefer to stay home and like play video games if I want time off. But inevitably, I never take any time off. If I have like a free week, I'm just like, well, what could I do in that week? Maybe I could write a book. Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit today about Geeks and Normies, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that and how this applies to marketing, whether you are looking to market a book or say a graphic novel or a comic book or even something else besides that. So this is a little bit of a cross thread with marketing. And the reason I want to talk about this is because how you go about targeting an audience can have an effect on the art that you produce. And a lot of people will think of that first. Think of what a target demographic wants to see or hear, what kind of products they want to buy in a marketing sense. In other words, marketing is leading product development. In this case, you could think of your product development as being your book that you're going to write, and the marketing department being a bunch of stuff that I'm going to show you and talk to you about. So yes, it is an Emperor shirt. It's an old, I think this is 9 Equilibrium. Old shirt. Anyway, so we're going to dig into that today. Little bit of channel news. So obviously I'm back and we got the Writestream going. I'm not sure how many more of these I will do before I decide to call it quits on the show. Nothing bad about me wanting to do that, by the way. It's just I don't want to continue something beyond the point in time where I can actually make it good. And so that means that things need to have a limited lifespan. A lot of times people get very upset when things come to their natural conclusions, and I don't want to end up in that particular situation. So eventually, there's just not that much more to say. The audience, I'm not bringing in new audience, or I'm repeating myself in a lot of different ways, or I'm just not bringing a lot of new things to the table. And at that point, then it's good to think about the next thing. So the next thing is probably going to be something that's more focused on products and artists. So having guests on to talk about new releases, independent books, independent comics and movies, that sort of stuff. So that's what I'm kind of thinking for the next show. And it'll probably be the same day, Wednesday, unless I have some compelling reason to change it to the weekend. Might do weekend because, people have more free time on the weekend. Wednesday is a good sort of break in the middle of the week for me. And right now I'm doing all my recording on Saturdays, so I could easily put a show on Sunday or something like that. So we'll see where we go with this after this. But today we're going to talk a little bit about marketing. Last bit about the channel. If you've noticed, there's actually a schedule to the videos I'm releasing every week. Monday, I'm always talking about metal, so it's always like a metal album. I'll talk about either a new one, or if I don't feel like talking about any new releases because they suck or something, then I'll talk about a classic record. Tuesday right now is Lovecraft. Once I conclude Lovecraft, I'll move on to something else like Robert E. Howard, maybe something classic that people can access for free, and I think people ought to read, that kind of stuff. Wednesdays are the stream. Thursdays are usually just a topic on thought, a thought topic like philosophy or data, statistics, or just something that I think is worth thinking about. Not news, but principled thought. Friday, Fiction Friday. I'll talk about a fiction book. Right now I've been talking about Twilight, which actually is over here in the stack. Ended up in the stack somehow. But yeah, I've been talking about Twilight. Yeah, you'll still be able to talk to me. And then Saturday, Sunday, it's pretty much free for all, whatever my random videos are. Those are usually going to be some of my wide focused videos, and I'll talk about that because it has to do with this topic at hand of Geeks and Normies. So before I dig into a little bit of a lecture here, let me think about the terminology that I'm using. So Geeks and Normies, you can use any kind of words. You can use MOPs, like members of the public, and fanatics, whatever you want to use. I'm using Geeks and Normies. So geeks And even the choice of the words here at Geeks and Normies is intended to focus on one of these two categories, and hopefully you'll be able to guess which category this entire stream and presentation is intended to focus on, just by the terminology I'm using. But a geek is somebody who's really into something. So a geek who's really into Warhammer, which is a tabletop battle game, they're going to be really into it. They're going to own lots of figures and things like that. And a normie is somebody who casually consumes or isn't into things which require a high level of dedication or a large upfront investment in order to access. So a normie is somebody who goes to the movies, buys books, that kind of stuff. Usually most people are geeky about something, but when we're talking about this discussion, we're talking about a type of person and a focus on a type of person within a broader market that's much more into whatever you're talking about. Now, the best things that you want to look at for evaluating this is something like Star Wars, something that's really big, because Star Wars has a shift from somebody who's a normie who just goes and watches the movies, all the way to somebody who's an extreme geek when it comes to Star Wars. And this is one of the reasons that the franchise has been so successful, but also one of the reasons it's been so profitable, because the geek, what I've called the long tail of fandom in the past, is per person a much deeper investor than a normie. So if you make $1 billion on a movie, it's easy to think, well, we've been very successful, or you probably won't make $1 billion. What you'll do is you'll gross $1 billion. Say worldwide you gross $1 billion as a Star Wars film. It's easy to look at that and be like, oh, well, that's where the money is. It's in the movies, because you see that $1 billion upfront investment. But what you don't see are the billions that get made through toy sales, merchandise sales, things like that. And when it comes to merchandise sales, a sale of one shirt is more money in your pocket if you're the company than a sale of one movie ticket by a lot, because the movie ticket gross gets eaten up by all kinds of things. If you're grossing $1 billion, you may be taking home $200 million. Whereas your toy sales may be $500 million and you're taking home $250 million. But the people who are buying the toy sales are a much smaller portion of the overall fandom. So there's going to be geeks that buy the toys, they play the video games, they read the novels. And if you have a really big franchise like Star Wars, you have this continuum from very casual people all the way down into extreme geeks. Now, the thing is, if you're an author or you're a comic book creator, you have to figure out what you're actually doing, because chances are you're not making Star Wars. You're not making a giant franchise that attracts both normies and filters down into geeks. What you're more than likely doing is making single products. And so if you're making single products, you have to think about who you're targeting along a continuum of a broader market. So let's say you're making a comic book. You're going to make an independent comic book, and you're going to make it focused on superheroes. You're going to make a standard cape comic, a superhero comic. So a superhero comic, if you imagine like, man, I want to be the next Marvel, that's not really going to make you any money. What you have to think of is who in the broader market of superhero comic readers am I actually going to try to target? Are you going to try to target the people that DC and Marvel have tried to target, which is these hardcore fans? They buy multiple copies of things, buy different variant covers. They're really into, expensive versions of comic books. Or are you trying to find someone further along the spectrum towards the normies? If you're looking at comic books, the problem with comic books, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, is that the normies stopped reading them forever ago, more than 20 years ago. I made a recent video on this. So what you have left with comics is, rather than this kind of hyperbola type curve from a big section of normies going down to like an extreme level of geekdom where they collect all the comics, what you instead have is just no normies and a very small rise in the middle, and then a taper into a long tail. So are you going to go towards that rise in the middle or the taper of the long tail? Well, if you're making one book, obviously you want to go towards the biggest portion of that curve, because you are not selling multiple copies of things, right? You're not selling multiple products. If you are Marvel, yes, you still want to target those geeks. You want to target the people who are really into comic books. But if you're not Marvel, you're just making one book. You need to target as far to the normie side as possible, because you're trying to sell as many copies. Now, this gets a little bit more complicated when you look into book marketing, because book marketing has a much more diverse set of genres than comic books do, or even manga. Well, I don't know about manga, but definitely more so than the comic books. But what you do get is a much, much, much broader set of demographics. You have people that are like absolute clueless normies about literature, all the way down into people who read every single steampunk book that comes out. And if you're writing a novel, where you want to target on that is a decision that you have to make. And it's one that's actually a lot of authors have very, very different opinions on. Now, I will tell you, for me, I actually don't consider the market really at all when I write a book. I write the book that I want to write, and then I figure out who wants to read it afterwards. Other writers do what's called writing to market. They do a bunch of thought and calculations, and they use a couple of marketing tools, one of which I'll demonstrate for you today, called Publisher Rocket. It used to be called KDP Rocket. They use a bunch of these tools. They try to find a market where they can sell their book well in that market. Usually it's going to be a smaller cluster of people. And the reason they want to do that, there's a bunch of reasons. Obviously, if you make a book that's as broad appeal as possible, you're in an area where there's so much noise, there's so many other products that no one could read it, even though it might appeal to a really broad set of people. But if you go towards something that's extremely geeky, where the market's really small, the category is incredibly depopulated, there may be nobody who wants to read it anyway. You may sell the same number of copies making, a variant, copying Game of Thrones, for instance. Actually, that one may not even be normie level, but I don't know what's a good one. Janet Ivanovich. Like, if you do a copy of that and you sell 100 copies and no one reads it, you might sell 100 copies writing something that's really specific as well. The difference is, and this is why authors often choose this, you can sell 100 copies in some of these Kindle categories and end up with a #1 bestseller. This is why when people say, I'm a best-selling author, that often doesn't mean quite as much as you think it means. What it usually means is that you were #1 in one category for enough time to get the orange badge. And sometimes not even that, right? Like, I've been #1 in various genres a bunch of times, but I haven't stayed at #1 long enough to get like that #1 bestseller badge. And part of it is that, like, I'll give you two examples of what you shouldn't do maybe if you're trying to think like this. So Muramasa Blood Drinker, this is my samurai fiction book, and it actually, there's no genre for it, right? It falls into like Asian folklore, but it's not that, or Japanese historical fiction, and it is kind of that. But because of the elements that are in it, it has virtually nothing as far as a literary work remotely in common. It barely has the setting in common with other things that are Japanese historical fiction, right? So it might be somewhat like Shogun in the fact that there are samurai, right? And they're in Japan and they have swords, right? But the story is not anything close to it. The characters are completely different. It's nothing like regular run-of-the-mill Japanese historical fantasy or historical fiction. So the problem is that this doesn't fit into one of those Kindle categories, which means even if I sell lots and lots of copies, because of the way it's positioned with other competition, it's really hard for it to get and stay at #1. I've had it to #1 in different categories, but like it won't stay there because I can run a promotion special or like drop it down, either do it like I could do a free promotion and then all of a sudden it sells like 1,500 copies, or like run it for 99 cents for a while and then it sells more copies, but it won't really stay there because I'm competing against Shogun, right? Like a classic book. That's where it gets put. So you'll see Shogun and then like this book next to it, and you're like, no one else is actually in that category at all, because people don't read Japanese historical fiction very much. And then if they want a samurai fiction thing, they're probably going to be picking up a manga. So marketing this is tough. My best success with running ads is actually to target people who are reading manga, because then they might read a novel that's not manga but has a lot of elements that they might like if they're a Japanese manga reader, particularly if they're into something like shoriguri or shigerui, and I don't know, even something like I could run an ad against Samurai Champloo, which is nothing like this book, but might attract the same readers. This one, likewise, this is a sci-fi horror book. You can actually still get this one for free if you're on my mailing list at dvspress.com/list. It's a sci-fi horror book. There's no such thing as sci-fi horror as a category on Amazon. So it gets put into horror, science fiction, and horror and science fiction are both really crowded categories. So it's really hard to find much more narrow categories where you can say, like, look, I got the #1 bestseller badge. But that #1 bestseller badge may not mean that much other than a thing that you can put on your resume. So if you're wanting something to put on your resume, you can actually manipulate the way this works on Kindle and get a #1 bestseller badge in a category that doesn't even represent your book. That's why I'm like, it's cool to have, definitely. It's cool to launch at #1 or be in a category that you can actually get #1 in. But it doesn't mean you've sold a lot of books. Because when people hear bestseller, what they think of is New York Times bestseller. And I can actually go into some depths on that, on how that is actually somewhat fraudulent as well. It doesn't mean what people think it means. And the way that sales are calculated in the broader world outside of Amazon. Amazon's very precise, but when it comes to like bookstores and even Barnes & Noble, it's not as precise as you think. And people can actually buy their way onto the bestseller list. And I can tell you a couple ways that people do that. Before I go into it, actually, I'll go into it real quick. I'll just give you a basic rundown. So the New York Times bestseller list has been manipulated for decades, just so you know. And one of the ways that it used to be manipulated very well is you'd get like, say, a radio talk show host like Rush Limbaugh would write a book, probably with a ghostwriter, and he'd buy like 1 million copies of the book or like 100,000 copies of the book, which automatically is like #1 New York Times bestseller if you had it. So his company, not himself, but his holding company, his LLC, will buy some huge quantity of books, and then you get the book for free when you subscribe to his special fan club thing. There's a bunch of, like, Bill O'Reilly did this, Rush Limbaugh's done this, and I'm sure there's guys on the other side of the aisle that have done that as well. So you get the Limbaugh letter and you get his book for free. So are those sales legitimate? It's hard to say. Well, obviously it's part of the value of the Limbaugh letter. So an end user is buying the book, but he's not buying the book in the same way that somebody at the store would see Rush Limbaugh's book and buy it. It's a different category. It's a different action. So it's a little weird. So they started putting asterisks on like political books that, a company would buy a huge quantity of them and then give them away as part of some other ulterior value package. There's also been several scams in the last few years getting on the New York Times bestseller list where a person who writes a book is ordering certain quantities of the book from every bookstore, like all across the country. Like they call up the bookstore and they're like, do you report to this? Do you report to the sales scan? And they're like, yes. And it's like, I need 15 copies of this book. Because if you buy more than that, then the copies won't count. But if you buy less than that, then it counts. And so they go around and order copies literally from every bookstore, and it adds up to like 5,000 or 10,000. And that's, you actually can be a #1 bestseller in particular genres with like 5,000 books, which isn't that much when you stop and think about it. Like most of my books approach 5,000 copies as far as like total sold. And certainly, like, I've given away a huge number of free copies as well. So 5,000 copies is not that much, but you get it, and then boom, you're on the New York Times bestseller list, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're like, this is a best-selling book. And so that social proof of best-selling book ends up selling the book for you, even though you've spent $30,000 buying copies of your own book. You're hoping to make $30,000 back by just selling it as a bestseller. It's a #1 New York Times bestseller, even though it's a bestseller because you bought copies. Does that make sense? So anyway, there's all that. All right, let's take a look at some chat. I do have some super chats from before the show. Just so you know, if you put in a super chat before the show begins, it will disappear once the show actually begins. I happen to see these and copy them out, and I want to answer them. So these are from Kajetan, or I don't know if you're Dutch, but it looks like a Dutch name, so I'm going to call you Kajetan. Kajetan or Kajetan. Hi, about to publish a book, published on Amazon and confused by adult content box for both paperback and Kindle. My book is gory and has 2 times the word shit. Adult content? And then second one, if I publish on Amazon exclusively, do I need the copyright year name statement on second page? I'm not planning on registering, and it's a pen name. So I can answer both of those pretty well. So the first one is you can just tick that box. What that box is used for is for a larger distribution. So if the book is going to go, somebody orders it, it's marked as adult content. So if somebody orders it from like a Barnes & Noble store, they need to be an adult, right? So if you want to, you can tick that box. I tick the box for several of my books. It will not stop you from being in a young adult category, believe it or not. So you can tick that box and still sell young adult fiction without any problems. So if you're worried about it, you can just tick it. It's not going to do anything. For most people, 99% of people, it's not going to do anything. It basically puts your book on top shelf status, which is going to be most books anyway. It won't be put in the teen or young adult section on a bookshelf. But your chances are your book's not going to end up on the bookshelf anyway. Second question, if I publish on Amazon exclusively, do I need the copyright year name statement on a second page? The truth is you actually don't need that. That statement is there it's just a legal statement. I recommend you put it on. Now, you don't have to list your name. You could just say copyright 2019 and just not put your name. Mine say copyright, mine says, I'll tell you exactly what mine says word for word. Copyright 2019 David Van Dyke Stewart, all rights reserved. What that legal statement means is that I'm the holder of the copyright. And all rights reserved means that this is not published under any kind of other common license, like Creative Commons or public domain. Meaning I reserve all rights. You don't have any rights to make a movie out of this. You don't have any rights to alter this and share it. All the rights are reserved by me. None of those rights are in the public domain. Okay. If it was a public domain work, that would be a different thing. You couldn't put all rights reserved. Or you could put it, but it would be not a legal notification. This work may not be reprinted in whole or in part for profit or not without prior express written permission of the author. That's actually not necessary because that's already the law, but I just put it there in case people aren't up to snuff, right? Some people really, they don't understand how things work. So they're like, why can't I reprint this? Because you don't own the rights to it. This is a work of fiction. All characters and events portrayed herein are fictitious. Any resemblance to actual people living or dead is purely coincidental. So that's a little bit of a disclaimer that just says no one in this book is based on a real living person. So if some real living person sees it and they're like, boy, this is just like me. I bet this person based this character on me. It's like, no, I didn't. None of my characters are based on anybody for the most part. I've written screenplays with characters based on people I know, and I kind of tell them that, but it's not really them, And generally, even if you base it on someone that person, you're not going to owe royalties to that person in most cases, unless you're writing like some sort of, even if you're making a biography, you don't have to. $2 super chat. Is there a market for standalone heroic fantasy? Yeah, it's the heroic fantasy market. It's big, right? There's a market for everything. So the problem with standalone heroic fantasy is it's a huge market. It's a gigantic market, and it's full of authors who are trying to sell in it. So picking categories that are more narrow when you do your book or when you are publishing your book can help it get more visibility in certain categories. That doesn't mean you should avoid heroic fiction or heroic fantasy. The question is, how are you going to get the attention of people in a very saturated market? And it's not that you shouldn't do it. I don't say it's a legitimate question. You need to think about how am I going to get people's attention and get people to share this book, get people to think about buying it. What should my ads be like? Who should I target for ads? Trust me, there's no market that's too saturated for you to actually sell in. The question is where you want to be on rankings. Authors get very, very obsessed with where they are on some predetermined ranking scale, like where their author rank is, or how many, are they number one in some category? And none of that crap really matters to me. All I care about is that there's people who read the book and like it. And if the numbers are going up, if more people are reading it, then I know I'm doing a good job with my marketing. And if they're going down, then I need to fix something. Or if they're staying static, I need to fix something. Me personally, I don't obsess over all that stuff. Is there a market for this? Are people going to be upset if I have a character like that? I'm like, I don't care about that. I don't care at all if people don't like the book. If I write a book and everybody hates it, that's fine. I wrote the book I wanted to write. If I write a book and I get a bunch of hate online because of something in the book, I don't care. I wrote the book that I want. I've gotten people get upset about all kinds of dumb things in my books. And in fact, because of the audience I usually track, which is more right-leaning, from your perspective, it's probably right? This is my right. Because I tend to attract more right-leaning people, they get upset that, like, the heroine is, that the main character is female. They're like, why would you write a main character who's female? It's so dumb that you have a female warrior, like, chopping people up with an axe. It's like, I imagine it as a girl, and there's like reasons for her to do what she does. Or I remember somebody getting all, I don't know what to say, like in a tiz. They got all upset that I had a princess in a fairy tale who went hunting with a dog. It's like women went hunting in the Middle Ages, but people are going to get upset no matter what. So who cares? Just write what you want to write. That's my opinion. Write what you want to write and figure out how to market it after the fact. That's the way I do it. But I'm going to provide some information for people who want to think a little bit broader than that. All right, let's check some chat before I move on. Film Girl, this may sound stupid, but will we still be able to talk to you in this form? Yeah, I will have more live streams. They're just going to be focused more on product launches and products in the future. And I don't know how many more of these I'll do. I'm not, I haven't decided. Love your Twilight analysis, by the way. Thank you. I know people actually like that because they want to know what's up with Twilight. Twilight is a super popular book, folks. And not only is it a super popular book, but it's a super popular book that people bought and read. Let me go on a slight digression, talk about this. So I'm stealing an idea by telling you this, and I don't remember whose it was. I read it on Twitter from another author. About selling books not just to readers, not just to people who read books, but to people who buy books but don't read them, which sounds very weird. But it's something like 80% of books are never read that are sold. I don't remember what it was. It was a huge, staggering amount. But when you stop and think about normies, it makes sense. So normies go down, they buy the Dan Brown book because everybody's reading Da Vinci Code. And then they put it on their coffee table because it's the cool book to have around, and then they don't read it. Because it's not really for them. It doesn't super interest them. But does that mean that you shouldn't sell those normies books that they aren't going to read? The answer is probably no. It's like if it's the cool hip thing to do is to have a book by you, even if they don't read it, they bought it. So it's okay, right? That has to do with kind of marketing glamour rather than writing something specifically for readers. So if you're only chasing people who read books, who read every book they buy, then you're missing out on a portion of the market, which is people who buy books but don't read them. Twilight is a book that people bought, and almost everyone who bought it read it. And a large portion of the people who bought it and read it really, really liked it. And became massive fans of the series. So that means it's probably worth your time and attention to figure out what's going on there. Now, this is different from, you should read Da Vinci Code too, even though I don't really like the book, because it got a lot of people interested. But I think Da Vinci Code is one of those books that people talked about but didn't read. Or there's a bunch of them. Look in the literary fiction section, like Barnes & Noble have them out. Every so often they have like tables where they have books out for normies to look at. That's like, this is the hit book, Sacre Bleu. And people pick it up and they're like, I like the book cover. And they look at a synopsis and they're like, oh, this looks like a hip, cool book to read. And they buy it and they take it home and they don't read it. There's a copy of Sacre Bleu like on my mom's bookshelf. She's never going to read it. I'm not going to read it. No one cares about that, right? So it's okay to write books that people don't want to read, but the books that people buy and read, that's what you really want, Did you draw that map behind you? It was a couple years ago I found you via your map drawing videos. Yes. So that is the map for Needle Ash. So there's a couple maps. So one is from Needle Ash. It's in the front. That's the full color version in the back. I think you'd actually get that from DeviantArt, which I don't know if that's the best way to have that. But here's what it looks like in the book. A little too bright. I have like super bright lights on my face. probably a little too bright for you guys to see it. Maybe if I do, there it is. Kind of have it at an angle there. You can see it a little bit. So it's in black and white in the book, but full color in the ebook. Full color on the back wall. So yeah, that's from that one. Is that Hello Kitty guitar always been there? Not always. My guitars, because I moved into this office like 6 months ago or whatever, 7 months ago, it's been in a state of chaos. I put up a bookshelf to just hold more of my garbage so I could have more guitars up. So, there's a bunch of guitars on the wall there. There's some guitars over there. I still have a bunch of junk sitting around from when I built the bookshelf and kind of threw everything into disarray. But yeah, so there's like a rack, and I have some on the wall. And the whole idea was like I was wanting to do more music, but man, I like having to go in the closet, dig out 10 guitars to get the one guitar I wanted to use. It was just becoming a hassle and was interrupting the workflow. So, just trying to get my workflow back so I could actually make more music, which I want to do. I want to put out another album here at some point, so I need to be doing a little bit of daily work on that. Let's see here. Nice new stream. You were comfy to have in the background. Thank you. While playing some video. 3 a.m. here in Norway, and I'm going through Morrowind. Perfect quest for power game. Maximum comfy. I love Morrowind. I hope you're doing. I should do a video on what mods with Morrowind and that kind of stuff. Morrowind is great. Morrowind's an interesting game because it's pretty much like a geek-only kind of game versus something like Skyrim, which is very appealing to normies and has some geek elements. So whenever people complain that Skyrim is not deep enough or it's too shallow, that's a geek complaint, because what they want is the deeper systems of Oblivion and Morrowind. Jared Wignall, yes, Lucasfilm and Disney haven't really been making Star Wars films and merchandise that appeals to the core fan base. Yeah, and it's going to take them longer to recoup their money that way. Jack Cool says, I think I speak for all of us that I hope you replace the Writestream with another regular stream. I will. So when I'm done with this one, we'll do another one for sure. The Church of Scientology has had their members buy copies of L. Ron Hubbard's Battlefield Earth in bulk to make it a bestseller. Yeah, I heard that. They also, the church itself bought copies of Dianetics. And the whole idea of buying copies of Dianetics was to make it a bestseller, They totally manipulated everything. Just want to reiterate, would totally love to know your opinion on Bionicle for real. Is that the Lego? I don't really remember it. So I think Bionicle was something that was a thing when I was in college. And you guys have to remember, I didn't watch TV other than, say, I didn't even watch South Park. I didn't have cable. I'd buy like South Park DVDs. But I didn't watch TV after about 1999. I haven't really watched TV. So 20 years. I haven't had broadcast TV really in 20 years, other than a couple of isolated times where it was in the house, but I didn't watch it. Van Dyke, yes, that's my middle name. That's why the guy who wrote romance erotica about velociraptors and other dinosaurs, he owned that market immediately. Oh, if you're talking about Chuck Tingle, so there's a whole different thing with Chuck Tingle. So Chuck Tingle, if you don't know who he is, his books are kind of a joke. They're like, Unicorn Lawyer is my lover, right? Something like that. And the covers are terrible and ridiculous. And you'll notice that he's a 2 or 3 time Hugo Award nominee. And if you don't know what the sick puppies were, the rabid puppies, the sad puppies, because of the way that particularly Tor, but other publishing houses run Worldcon and other cons which award awards, basically somebody who has a Hugo Award, it doesn't really mean anything anymore. It's something that is through their own manipulations of it. They ensure that only people from their publisher actually get Hugo Awards. So some authors, including Vox Day and who else? I think Larry Correia. They They organized the campaign to buy Worldcon tickets because you could vote on it if you buy it. So they were going to go to Worldcon, and whether you went or not, you could vote. And so they got everybody together to concentrate their votes on some specific titles. And one of them was, there was some Chuck Tingle title like Dinosaur Butt Love. I don't remember what it was called. But it was, the whole point was to show how ridiculous the Hugos were, that they were a rigged game, that they didn't mean anything, that there was no more prestige to having a Hugo anymore. And the result is that they not only did they nominate Vox Day, but they nominated, which he's like very hated by the science fiction publishers, even though he sells plenty of books. They nominated Chuck Tingle. So the whole point was like you saw this voting block that was Vox Day and Chuck Tingle. And so they responded by trying to give no awards out. So there was a year where like a whole bunch of categories for books and stuff. There was no award. They voted no award because they couldn't get their books nominated over the concentrated voting base of the people who were actually organized in a couple of these campaigns. First one was I think called Sad Puppies, and it was called Sick Puppies, and then Rabid Puppies. Which is to take it on. And what Vox Day was trying to do with that was trying to prove that social justice warriors, who are the ones who run and control places like Tor, they're what he would call a converged establishment. They would rather burn down the establishment than relinquish control of it. So rather than allowing books that people read to win Hugo Awards and books that people like to win Hugo Awards, they would rather nobody win Hugo Awards than books that people want to read. You have to keep in mind that people are winning Hugo Awards that have sold far fewer copies than I sell with books, and I'm just some dude. I don't even like market my books, and I sell more copies than some of these things, right? Like that's the publishing industry is in trouble if you're in the big five. I'm not saying you shouldn't go for traditional publishing deals, but at some point the optionality is going to cross over towards you don't want to like be on a sinking ship. That's my opinion, but there you go. I really enjoyed your video regarding comics and normies. I was just wondering if you do another type of video on that topic. Yeah, I'll talk more about it. Let's see here. Sorry, some of these are getting filtered, by the way. Joan Dark much? Psh, I don't know what you're talking about. Some of the comments are getting filtered, and let me tell you why real quick. So the last couple live streams I've put out have been demonetized due to the live chat, is why I believe they are demonetized. So I have to exert a little bit more control over the live chat because that's a residual revenue stream for me. People who complain about comments being moderated on YouTube and stuff, they don't realize that comments can be weaponized. So comments can be used to demonetize my videos. They could be used to get community guideline strikes on other people by basically pointing the bot to that video. Because the bot is not that good at understanding speech and the context of speech, the comments it can easily read. So trigger words in the comments, they will get the video demonetized. And that means that I have to be exerting a little bit more control. I have to mute people more in the chat. I have to filter comments because of their long-term impact. The reality is that if you are complaining that I'm moderating your comment so that my video can remain monetized, then you're not really commenting for my sake or anyone else's because you don't want the content to continue. So please keep the comments clean and respectful. Otherwise, it's the chat has to go away. So I'm all for free-for-alls. You can do free-for-alls on Gab or something like that. But on YouTube, it will have a very big negative impact for me if everybody spams my video with garbage. Any advice on writing children's books and what's appropriate for children's books, say 8 to 12? Because I don't write much in the way of children's books, it's hard for me to answer that. People who are better experts on it could probably say that. As far as what's appropriate, I'd say look at Roald Dahl or C.S. Lewis. There's death in those books. Sometimes there's grotesque things. But the things that aren't there are things which are sexualized. Personally, I wouldn't write a children's book that had any kind of overt sexuality or sexual discussion. Even something like, if you look at Harry Potter, they have crushes on each other. Maybe they kiss at some point. They're not like, there's no teenage pregnancy concerns in Harry Potter. And that's appropriate. And you don't want to put that kind of stuff in there. That's my thoughts. Other people have different opinions, but that's my personal feeling about appropriateness. And if I look at the books that are marketed in there, that tends to be it. Ash, do you think a new term that will describe geeks will be developed in the future, since the word geek is losing its original meaning or intention? It's getting lost. Yeah, probably. Fanatics. And it's just a word that works for now. Now, why am I using geeks and normies? Well, the word normie is understood by geeks, and the word geek is also understood by geeks. If I said mops and fans, no one knows what that means. It's not good for normies or geeks, right? But if I say normie, a bunch of people are like, boom, they instantly know what normies means. Like, normies are these oblivious people that just kind of buy things and exist and go to work. And I'm not one of them, right? So by using the word normie, I'm immediately speaking to people who aren't normies. That's part of the marketing. But that's who probably needs to see this content, or actually wants to see this particular content, is people who aren't in the normie category. Even though we don't have a ton of people watching this stream today. I think there's 79, which is okay. I'm used to a little bit more than that, I think. But anyway, I appreciate everybody who's here. I really do. What are your recommendations for great high fantasy novels? I've done a video on that. Let me give you a couple of quick ones. So Lord of the Rings, obviously you should start with that one. It's a classic of English literature. It's very well written. It's the most copied book or set of books in the history of the world, in my opinion. But let's go past that. If you want stuff that would be, and I know when it was written, it was considered more children's literature, but the Wizard of Earthsea books, the Earthsea Cycle by Ursula Le Guin, is a very, very good high fantasy book. That one is, Harry Potter heavily borrows its magic ideas from that particular series. So, but it's much more in depth. It's better in every way as far as the setting and everything goes. What if you were to compare that to Harry Potter, and you could do Harry Potter, right? Harry Potter's not really high fantasy. It's really low fantasy because it's our world plus magic, but magic's hidden. It's a little bit different approach. But I do recommend the Ursula Le Guin books. Michael Moorcock books are good. So if you want to read the Elric saga, there's 6 books and I think 2 interquels, and then a couple of other trilogies that are kind of related to it, kind of alternate versions and stuff like that. Those are good. They are extremely influential on dark fantasy and on this idea of deconstruction and anti-heroes, but they're great high fantasy novels all on their own. I like Glenn Cook books, especially the Black Company books. They are very, very good. They are dark high fantasy, or maybe what people might call now grimdark, though it's not heavily sexualized the way new stuff is. It's violent, but it's more just focused on war, and isn't super into taking sides on good and evil, though good and evil are definitely part of the conflicts. There's a bunch of others. I mean, you should read Robert E. Howard stuff. The Conan books could be considered high fantasy by today's standards. Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson is good if you want something contemporary. I would say Wheel of Time, but like half the books of Wheel of Time are borderline unreadable. The first 3 or 4 or 5 are pretty good. Like the first one's really good, and the second one's pretty good, and the third one's pretty. Each book it starts to get a little bit worse until you get to like book 8, and you're like, it's terrible. Book 8, book 9, I think they're just unreadable. And in book 10 it gets better, and then Brandon Sanderson finishes it off, and it's actually okay. So I don't know whether to actually recommend that one or not. There's a bunch out there. There's so many. But those are some good ones. Those are some classic ones. Also, the Books of Amber by Robert Zelazny. Also a great one. There's I think 10 Books of Amber. So the first one's very good. If you like kind of departure from our world. And then of course C.S. Lewis, right? Chronicles of Narnia. That's a children's focused one, but it's good. Speaking of Morrowind mods, have you seen Skywind? I have seen it, but I haven't played it, and I don't know if it would ever be playable, and I kind of don't see the point of it, to be honest. To me, part of Morrowind is the engine that makes it. It's not just the world, the way the buildings look. It's not just the quests. It's the way that you interact with the world, and that's part of the engine. That's part of the game design. Everything goes into what made Morrowind good was the systems, not just the content. So whenever I see like, oh, here's Sky Oblivion, we're gonna put Oblivion, but put it in Skyrim, put it in this newer engine, this newer version of the engine. It's like, what's the point? You know, the reason Oblivion was fun is because of the engine it was in. That was part of it. I don't want to play Oblivion without that 2007 or 2006 full screen glow. I loved that. That's why I love that. It gives me a nostalgic feel. It's better to mod the old stuff, in my opinion. And modded Morrowind still looks pretty good. Random question: how long should a flashback be? Whichever you can provide advice, only if you don't mind. So, I've done flashbacks. In Muramasa, there's a whole chapter that's a flashback done in first person. So it breaks out of the third person. And rather than being a flashback, it's telling a story in the first person for a whole chapter. So flashbacks can take a chapter, but you don't want to spend more than a few thousand words in a novel or a few minutes in a movie. Otherwise, you lose the flow of the current narrative. So most flashbacks are 30 seconds to 2 minutes is my experience in movies. And that works pretty well. If you start to get too much longer than that, then whatever tension you had before this flashback gets kind of filtered out of the audience's mind. And then you lose track of what's going on. So I'd say probably not more than 5 minutes, but keeping a flashback pretty short. Provide the necessary information to move on. That's my opinion. And that's what I've seen people do that works really well. Would you ever do a video about Robert Heinlein? Yeah. I have done videos on him. You need to found a cult so you can sell books to a captive audience. No. I know that L. Ron Hubbard, that's a pretty wicked thing. You know, I'm intimidated by the complexity of tax laws for freelancers such as writers. I'm learned by doing type whose eyes glaze over at the technical terms. Is there an easy way to learn? The tax law is not as complicated as you think it is. TurboTax will do a lot of it for you, or QuickBooks. Where some authors get into crazy territory is they start making LLCs, limited liability corporations that are their business entity, and then out of that they pay themselves, and they pay. You know, if you're just paying self-employed tax, you're paying the payroll tax in addition to your regular tax. If you have an LLC and you pay yourself that, you're still paying the payroll tax out of your LLC. But it's a way to keep your assets separate from yourself so you can take on debt. I wouldn't really recommend worrying about setting up corporations or anything like that as a front for your business unless you're planning on taking on large amounts of debt that you don't want to be personally responsible for, or you're trying to limit your own exposure to liability for whatever reason. For most authors, it's simply not that hard. The royalties I make, there's a category for that in the tax law. You just pay taxes on it. It's going to take you years before you're making enough money that general deduction is not, that you can't just manage most of your costs through deductions, which is what I do. I'm not a tax lawyer. I know tax lawyers. I know CPAs, but I'm not one. But for the most part, it doesn't have to be as complicated as you think it is. It's just when you talk to some authors and they've gone really extreme in ways to kind of manipulate their income stream to save money on taxes, it gets a little bit crazy. Let's see here. Yeah, it's the Lego franchise. Oh, Bionicle. It didn't have anything on TV besides ads. There were 4 films, a ton of comics. Totally don't know anything about him. If you don't think Chuck Tingle deserves a Hugo Award, then you don't know art. Yeah, I think The Unicorn Lawyer is My Lover is probably a great work in the Western canon. Do you like 1930s pulp heroes like Doc Savage, The Shadow, or Captain Future? I've read a lot of Shadow stuff. Yeah, I like that. I actually do like pulp heroes. I think they're great, and they have had a big influence. If you want to know what Batman is, he's the Shadow, but as a bat. Didn't they make a big stink about Ender's Game still getting respect because of the author being a big meanie head in the minds of the left? Absolutely. So Orson Scott Card is basically blacklisted at this point. That's my understanding. He can't publish a book and no one wants him around. Even though he's written the most significant science fiction book in the last 30 years, which is Ender's Game. Last 40 years, really. No respect. I'd say if you're talking about significant science fiction books, it's like Ender's Game and Jurassic Park. Those are like the two big ones. Have other people written science fiction books? Definitely, but have they had the impact of those two? No. Ender's Game because it massively influenced the genre, and Jurassic Park because it exploded a franchise, really, and made people think about something that hadn't really been confronted, which was genetic engineering and things like that. And that, in turn, was very influential. Even though it's very popular, you get movies that filter down out of that, like Gattaca, which really take it to a new level. And it's another, variation on some of the things Philip Dick talks about. But Jurassic Park really took it to the mainstream. And it actually is a good book. I did enjoy Jurassic Park as a book. I think Michael Crichton's a good writer. I said Joan d'Arc when you talked about people complaining about your medieval fantasy heroines. Yeah. Oh, yeah, but okay, I understand now. Yeah. You can't bring that up because they'll be like, well, she was just there to inspire dudes. And then the BBC made her black. What are you drinking? This is green tea. Hence the color green. Can you edit out the live chat or would it hurt the context? I cannot. So it's either all or nothing. And then some of the videos I can't even turn on the live chat to see. I can't see what people wrote because YouTube disables it after the fact because of what they wrote. The robots can hear. Obviously, that means you need to start a Google Hangout that let everyone in. Would you ever do a video series about the true Star Wars expanded universe and dive in all the novels from every era? I'd have to read them all. I haven't read them all. I've only read some of the novels. I'm not as much of a Star Wars geek as some people are, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just haven't. There's dudes who've read all the books. I haven't. Join your mailing list. Currently in the process of reading Crown of Sight. Now I have Voices of the Void. I'll let you know what I think. Thank you. C.S. Lewis is basically a bad World War II man in the eyes of the modern left. Obviously, he's a Christian. All Christians must be excised. I haven't seen the Tolkien biography movie, but what I was told is there's no mention of him being Catholic, which to me means you didn't make a biography about J.R.R. Tolkien. If his Catholic faith is not part of that discussion, it's not betrayed intimately, then you didn't portray his life at all, as far as I'm concerned. Ignoring those sorts of things is, you shouldn't do it. Yeah, we still have blasphemy laws, by the way. The blasphemy laws are against, political ideas now and not religious ideas. Trying to say that biology matters and things like that. What are your thoughts on Jules Verne and H.G. Wells? I've read both. They're good. Got nothing bad to say about them. I have to reread some of the older stories to do more content on them. Obviously very imaginative and influential. You could think of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. In a way, if you read steampunk stuff, it's like that. It's like if you took that to an extreme. That's kind of what you get. That's sort of the appeal of it. So very, very deep-reaching tentacles, and you've been into modern thought. Do you think creators of Star Wars and Star Trek were genuine geeks? I don't know what you mean by that, because to me, like I said, geeks are somebody who's really into something. I think that they were good writers. And so good writers will know their subject and will write well. That doesn't mean they're geeks. I think the people who made Star Trek, especially Next Generation, the stuff with Rick Berman, I think the reason the Rick Berman stuff still was so good, even though Gene Roddenberry wasn't involved and had died, was the people that were involved in it had a big passion for it. Jonathan Frakes is like a Star Trek geek. He really cared about Star Trek. He cared about the characters. When he directed his Star Trek movies, they were really good. for fans. They were like made to please the fans, the geeks, because they were so true to what was there. Then when you see something like Star Trek Nemesis, where you pull Frakes out and you put in somebody who purposefully doesn't watch Star Trek and dislikes it to try to make something for normies, you get a terrible product. And so that's another thing, right? If you need to know who your product is based towards. Is it based towards people who are very geeky about something, or is it for normies? Because the tendency with Hollywood is try to make everything for normies, even if the product cannot be translated accurately to like a normal mindset. Something that is about like robotics on an intimate and technical level, people aren't going to get it. So why would you try to rip out the heart of a story in order to make more people pay attention to it? It doesn't work out. The heart of the story is really where it's at. Let's keep going. Conan the Chimerian is sword and sorcery by old standards. Yeah, it's great. That is sword and sorcery. I think I have it on the bookshelf in the other room. Not recommending the absolute legendary classics known as the Dragonlance series. Okay. One second. All right, here we go. So here's the first one, which I was reading again. It's called Dragons of Autumn's Twilight, by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. Tracy's a dude, by the way. Some people think it's a male and a female duo. It's a book for geeks. It's a book for D&D geeks. And notice I have a D&D box over here. Maybe a little bit later in the stream, we'll pop it open. We'll see what's in it, because I want to talk about that a little bit, and I want to do a video on it too for later in the week. But here it is, Dragons of Autumn's Twilight. If you are a mature adult reader, this is going to be not good. You're not going to really enjoy it. If you're 12, it's really fun. If you're 13, it's a really fun book. The characters are lots of fun. The adventures go on and on. Everything's new and exciting. But for adults, it doesn't hold up. Versus other things like Chronicles of Narnia, an adult can read that and actually still enjoy lots of things about it, although it's definitely for children. And I actually think Earthsea probably wouldn't fit into children's literature now, or even young adult. This was kind of like young adult before young adult was a thing. So if you want really pulpy, fun adventures, yeah, this is a great one. Depends what you want. And I actually enjoy this on one level, which is that it's a pulpy, campy adventure. But do I think it is a great example of high fantasy literature? The answer is no. Sorry, it just doesn't hold up all that well. It reads like a D&D campaign. If that's what you want to read, it's great. It's like lit RPG before that existed, before that was a thing, right? After you finish with Lovecraft videos, might you make some about Poe stories? Yeah, I like Poe stories. I'll show you a Poe pop-up book too if you guys want. That my sister bought me. It's really cool. My son likes to read it and like mess with it and wants me to like be dramatic and read The Raven. It's the Raven pop-up book. But I'll just usually put on the Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee reads it, and you can actually find it on YouTube. He does a good job. I recently went back to an old game reviewer I like and watched his Wolfenstein Youngblood video. I couldn't believe how ransacked it had been. Mainstream game filmmakers are trying to destroy our culture. The future is guys like you. Yes. So this is something people need to understand. Like, why is everything being converted? Well, we created a situation where there's a ring of power, right? And the ring of power is called control of the IP, control of the corporation, control of the franchise. So we vest this intellectual property into a corporation called Lucasfilm, or whoever it is. Lucasfilm, excuse me. I need to sneeze again here. Hold on. Nope. Lucasfilm gets bought by Disney. You no longer have to make something that's good and enjoyable and fun and is good for everybody. You no longer have to make something that's successful. All you have to do is take over this non-human entity called a corporation which people come in and out of all the time, in order to gain control over what somebody else has established and then change it to suit whatever messaging you want. This is what happened with Marvel, and it almost made Marvel go bankrupt. People don't realize this, but Marvel was bankrupt when Disney bought it, and it has not done better since then, for the most part. Marvel is, if Disney did not own Marvel, there would be no more Marvel comics. They would have run the brand into the ground. It would have been liquidated, and all of the IPs would have been sold off as assets to other companies. So anyway, you don't have to, when you have all of this, like Disney owns now, as far as movies, like 80% of franchises. So you don't have to make a new franchise. You don't have to think about how to make a good movie. All you have to do is get a job somewhere where they already own the movies and you can do whatever you want. So that's a big temptation. Rather than having to compete or do anything, there's no competition. You don't have to compete. You just have to go in and take over what somebody else has already done. That's why we're seeing the destruction of culture. It's why it's so important, indie games. It's like, why is Bethesda ever going to make another good game again? I don't know. But I know other studios could have the potential to make good games, and we should look first towards those studios which are not in that position. They haven't been converged, and they're probably going to do, produce things that aren't going to do that. All you're looking at now with Marvel stuff is you're riding on the past. You're riding on the success of the past at this point. Everything past Endgame, you look at it, and it's like they're going to do the female Thor storyline, which is horribly unpopular as far as comic book geeks go, and you're going to sell that to normies. If it's not even popular in the geek section, it's probably not going to be popular for normies. It's going to be awful. It might be successful, and then I'll have to eat crow, but I just can't imagine it'll be good. You've never seen the Heinlein video. Yeah, I talked about Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers is not my favorite Heinlein book. In fact, I think it's it's definitely in the lower half of Heinlein books I've read, as far as what I like. I think it's not a very well-written book. The ideas in it are very influential, but I don't like the ideas that are really in it either. They're too focused on the state. I get where he comes from with it. They're interesting ideas, and I think that's probably what saves the book, is that they are still interesting, but I don't agree with the ideas, and the book is constructed in a way that I really don't like. And oddly, the idea that ends up being the most successful in science fiction is not the ideas that he really cared about, like this whole idea of having a culture of people that aren't pure consumers on the state. That got ignored, and instead it's like power armor and bugs. It's like that's what you remember from Starship Troopers, which is fine. You never get to determine what things are going to have the influence, but I think Robert Heinlein cared more about his philosophical ideas than he did the fact that there were power armor and bugs. So when people always talk about power armor and bugs, I'm like, this isn't a big part of the story, guys. The power armor and the bugs are just part of the setting. It's like the background to what he was really talking about. I could probably make another video that talks about that too. Let's see here. Missed something. Oh, I was joking with Dragonlance. I know. You said not to joke in text, whatever. I obliterated those when I was younger and realized it's always the same story. Yeah. It's fun. Like, if you're 12, it's fun. Let's see here. I'm missing a bunch of chat, so let me... I always complain about the chat every week, but as soon as you want to scroll down, it just jumps all the way down to the bottom, and I miss everything. And then I have to go back up, try to figure out where we're at. Well, that makes me want to go read Ender's Game. Ender's Game is a great book. Here's my... I'll do a video on it, but here's my one criticism, is that the book wasn't quite long enough. So there's these couple of chapters about Ender's brother and sister, like having secret online identities and influencing political thought the world over, which is very resonant today, but it disrupts the story. They're great ideas, but it doesn't belong in Ender's story. It belongs in a different book. And he even wrote Ender's Game because he wanted to write follow-up stories. And it's funny, people don't read the follow-up stories, including me. I haven't read all of them. I'm a bad boy. What high fantasy or science fiction novels do you think could be made into an anime? Oh boy. All of them. Here's the great part about an animated movie. It's why do people watch anime? It's not because the eyes are big. The big reason is that it's imaginative. There's actual imagination. You're not limited by anything. So I watch animes or read manga, which, a lot of animes are adapted from manga, that are just off the wall. I watched one a while back that's like this village on the edge of an ocean, but it's made out of sand, which was like a thing in Final Fantasy 12. But it's like, this is so weird. Like, who thought that this was coherent? But it's cool that they did that. Like, it's cool that you do something that's really imaginative and off the wall. You can draw, what you can draw in a two-dimensional space to represent reality is far more interesting than what you can actually represent through CG. So this is something that we're discovering with modern Hollywood. Animated movies are in an animated medium for reasons that are beyond the fact that it's difficult to draw lions talking. So like if we look at the new Lion King looks horrible. The CG looks, so if you just watch the animals move, you're like, that doesn't look that bad. But you watch their mouths move and stuff, and you're like, this is Uncanny Valley disgusting level. It's stupid. Besides it being an unnecessary remake, it looks worse. Animation doesn't depict reality as it is. It represents reality. This is what people have to understand. Representations of reality often have a more profound and visual impact than highly detailed CG or something like that. So this redoing animated movies with CG is a terrible idea. It's going to look worse because the cartoon represents kind of an impression of reality. It's reality through a filter that transforms it. It's why when you look at a portrait drawn by a painter, it's different than looking at a photograph. This painting on Dragons of Autumn's Twilight, you could get like a real dwarf, a guy with like achondroplasia, and you could get a dude and a girl in this outfit, and you could maybe CG, you could make this photo or like take it in the Swiss Alps in autumn, right? You could duplicate. It wouldn't look the same because artists, part of the filter of creating art, even in a highly detailed painting like this, is that the artist is deciding what's important. And so all of what's important is what you see, and the things which are not important are just, it's like you don't see them because they're out of focus. They're not front and center. I've talked about this with artist Jesse White, who I've had on the channel. Better comic book artists of the past would draw an image with very few lines, and part of that was economics. They had to get the work done. But the other part of it was that the fewer lines represent the image better than many lines. I know that sounds weird, right? But like the more lines you draw on a female face, the older and uglier she looks. So if you can draw a female face that's like just a shadow representing the nose here, and a light eyebrow, it's just a single line, and a couple lines for the eyes, she's going to look way more beautiful than if you were to try to draw her with extreme detail and like draw some extra little crow foot there, or like, any of these highly detailed ideas. So a great portrait artist, the filtering of art makes it look better. And that's true with anime. So I know I'm going off on a huge long tangent with this, and it should be its own video, and maybe I will make it its own video. But anime is important, or animated films are important because they aren't real looking, because they represent reality. And in turn, when you see that, you filter it through your own set of cognitive processes to make an image that's actually more realistic and more interesting to you than if somebody had made a physical object or done CG. That's something. So I didn't answer the question. What high fantasy or science fiction novels do you think could be made into an anime? Any of them. They're all great. I think the Hobbit animated film from the 70s by Rankin Bass, which I think was animated in Japan, looks far better aesthetically. It looks better aesthetically. It's better than the Peter Jackson ones. The Peter Jackson ones, they spent $100 million on CG effects, and it doesn't look as good as an animated movie. It's because the animated movie is closer to the idealized version of the aesthetics than millions of dollars worth of CG can possibly do. You can't replicate what an artist does, what an artist actually puts on the page. So any of them could be. Dragon's Bottom's Twilight. This would actually be a really good anime series. People would really like it, I think. I think it'd be a hit. Water of Awakening would be a great anime. Because there's huge portions of it that are completely unreal. Could never be depicted visually correctly. You could do so many creative things with animation to do the Phalanx in that, which is basically a world that obeys no laws. It's bizarre. Are sequels better when planned ahead of time as part of a series? Generally, yeah, but they generally aren't because you don't know if it's going to be successful to plan a sequel. If you're planning sequels and you don't know if the first one's successful, you might be wasting your time. I had a middle school teacher recommend the Ender's Game to me when reading level charts. Kept recommending me hippie coming of age crap. Never looked back. About taxes again. Does having to pay state taxes in addition to federal ones make paying taxes complicated? Yes and no. TurboTax is a very good piece of software. It makes it a little bit easier. But yes, it makes it much more complicated. California is a very complicated tax state. It's the state I live in. For me, doing taxes is a big deal. I don't usually have to get help with it, but it's tough, Chesterton's quote is always good. Christianity is always out of fashion because it is always sane, and all fashions are mild insanities. This is another thing, too. In the height of Christianity's domination of Europe, true men of faith and morals were still hard to find. I'm having trouble with writing story arcs for my characters, specifically with their need and want in the story. Any advice on how to get the right mindset for that? Not really, but you have to think about what they want in the story. Sometimes some people are just along for the ride, and so their growth is going to be minimal. Not everything has to have an arc. Not all characters have to have a growth arc. That's not necessary. If you're writing an everyman type of character, he does need a growth arc. If you're writing a bad boy, they tend to have a growth arc where they become some more virtuous thing. But not all character types need that. So I wouldn't even worry about it. What are your thoughts on the original Heinlein Starship Troopers novel versus the Paul Verhoeven movie? I have made a video on that. So I like the Paul Verhoeven movie because it makes fun of the Heinlein novel. And I like the way that he uses the movie to satirize its own source. It's a very interesting movie from that perspective. And it's a kind of a fun little B action movie in its own right, even though it's high budget. But when you understand that it's everything in it is a choice made to poke at Heinlein's story, which Paul Verhoeven says he was so dreadful he couldn't finish it and had to have somebody else describe it to him. And that's how he decided to make fun of it. And honestly, it's on a technical level, it's not a well-constructed book, in my opinion. There's no flow of plot. It's really about the philosophy. And if you know it from that, then it can be a good read. It can be a fun read. If you know that it's about the philosophical ideas within it, then it's a lot more of a fun read than if you're trying to enjoy a story. If you like pulp adventures, Starship Troopers is not that. One thing to keep in mind regarding Jules Verne is that many English translations of his books are poor. It's best to read up on the good translations before reading them. That's a very good point. It's a problem with a lot of translations. Same thing with Dostoevsky. I've met numerous people that are like, how could you read Dante's Inferno? It's like, buddy, you got to get a translation that doesn't suck. What do you think that geeks tend to be male? Yes. I shouldn't say tend to. I think that geeks are more often male than they are female. And there are some reasons for that. Because women are more often focused on certain social dynamics than men. Women are not as focused on subject matter. So if you're a geek in Star Wars, it's a subject matter thing. You're really into the subject matter of Star Wars. It's not to say women can't be at all. I think there's just more men than women in a lot of these quote geeky things that tend to attract people that are really into something. So men tend to be more focused on gaining specific expertise. Women tend to be more focused on general strengths. So, take that as you will. It doesn't stop any woman from being into something like Warhammer, but I think you're generally going to see more men than women in things which require constant upkeep or require a large upfront investment. Now, there's women who are geeky about things that people don't think about as something that is like a geek area, but makeup is one. So there's women who are makeup experts. They know everything about makeup. And men look at that and like, makeup, how could you be geeky about? It's an important thing for women, and for some women, that's something that they are really interested in knowing about, is makeup artistry and things like that. That is a geeky thing, and there's whole YouTube channels dedicated to it. So if there's million plus subscriber YouTube channels dedicated to makeup artist stuff, it kind of tells me that makeup artistry is something that has like a really strong, intense interest that men just don't pick up on because it's of zero interest to them. Why would men be interested in makeup unless they're in theater, right? And I have theater experience. It was always a woman who did my makeup, right? I did know several gay male performers who did their own makeup, but that still wasn't the norm, even for gay men. Even gay men were like, they had a woman doing the makeup artistry for whatever production we were doing. That's just the way it was. So I don't know. I think because men tend to be oblivious to a lot of women's interests, we're not going to recognize women's geekiness as being geekiness, because you're going to define it according to how you view it. And it doesn't mean that men can't be into makeup artistry or women can't be into trap shooting. But for the most part, shooting, like gun nuts, are just geeks. They're gun geeks. Dudes who go trap shooting 2 or 3 times a week, they're skeet geeks. I'm a skeet geek. I used to do that competitively, right? I don't do it as much anymore, but there's dudes who they're really into it. Are you interested in writing any stories about 1930s pulp style heroes? Yeah. I probably wouldn't reuse anybody else's established hero. I have zero interest in, say, writing Conan. I shouldn't say zero, because I really like Conan. It's like way lower interest though than anything else. I'd rather write my own stories. That doesn't mean they're not influenced. Like, all my books have influences from that stuff, so you can read them and like it. In a noirish first-person detective story, how would you write another character explaining the events they've been through without it just being a giant block of dialogue? You got to break it up with actions that happen in the narrative. Here's the thing. You can have, because in first person it's all dialogue, you have to think if you want to break that up. Lovecraft routinely wrote stories that had no dialogue. It was just the first person narrative. So if you're really good, you can pull it off. It's all about knowing how to control the rate of reading and the pace of the reader to prolong tension and focus them on certain details. People who like first-person noir detective stuff aren't that into reading lots of dialogue, but you can always break it up with dialogue. Tracy came in and talked to me about this. Boom, 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 boom. Have some dialogue. That way you don't just see big blocks of prose. Modern readers are not that into big blocks of prose. Just, that's the consensus, it seems. I was joking with Dragonlance. Okay, got this. Boom, boom, boom. Any mechanics you don't like about D&D that you change? Armor class. It allows certain kinds of exploitation, like having gnome warriors and stuff. It's kind of weird. So I'm not the way. I don't like the way they do armor class. There's certain things. I mean, you could get into it. If I were designing a thing from scratch, it'd be very different, simply because I have the experience of playing D&D to kind of guide me. But armor class is one that I've always thought was a little wonky. Thoughts on how to deal with training arcs. My story requires Know when to become a powerful warrior, but I don't want to just off-screen the training, but I'm not sure how interesting it is. Think of a montage. In a movie, you need a montage. Montage. Always fade out in a montage. So how do you do a montage in a book? Well, have scene breaks. And show in each little, you can have a bunch of mini scenes, and in each scene you show something that's improved. I read a book recently by R.A. Salvatore. I'm still not sure how to say his last name. It was The Crystal Shard. And in it, Drista Worden, who's a dark elf, highly skilled warrior, is training this Viking. And so it takes, he trains him for many weeks, but it takes a short amount of space in the book because it's not that important. And he just shows these snippets of then they're doing this, and then he's proud, and then they're ready for the story to move on. So it's just little images. Think of a bunch of snapshots of progress rather than having a lot of stuff like that. And also focus on the dialogue and the drama. It's probably going to be good. Let's see here. Oh, there's so much chat today. Before I get to more chat, let me show you guys a little tool. Because I'm talking about Geeks and Normies. So I'm going to show you a tool. This tool is called a Publisher Rocket. Used to be called KDP Rocket. This is what it looks like. Okay. So this is a piece of software you can buy. I don't remember how much it is, but I have it. And in it does 4 things here. You can also do them up here, but they put them as 4 big buttons. Keyword search, competition analyzer, category search, AMS keyword search. Let's take a look at category search first, because this is what we're talking about. And this is one of my big things. So we're going to look at ebooks. You can see these are all the categories that exist on Amazon. Art and photography, biographies and memoirs, business and money, children's ebooks, comics, manga, and graphic novels. Let's check that one out. So in it, you're going to see a bunch of different categories pop up here. Okay? And in this is a bunch of stuff that might be important here. The ABSR of number 1, which is the average bestseller rank. So number 1, these are actually fairly high. Believe it or not. Numbers of sales to get to number 1. It'll tell you. So here's the first one. Kindle ebooks, comics, manga, graphic novels. This is the broad category. This is the broadest category. You got to sell 400 copies to get to number 1 within a short amount of time. So this means you could actually get to number 1 with the number of copies you could sell on a Kickstarter if you're popular. The number 25, you only have to sell 77. So number 25 is like the bottom of the list. So when people are targeting, what they start trying to look at is the number of sales to get to number 1 and also the number of sales to get to number 25. And if you notice that there's a lot of sales at number 1 but not a lot of sales at 25, that might be interesting, because you could very easily get in this. Superheroes. So if you're making a superhero comic, it'd be really easy to get on the list, get on the 25 top ranked ones when somebody clicks on that category. And you also see that the average bestseller rank of number 25 is in the 66,000, whereas this one's 2,600. So this spread may seem like a lot, but it's really not. The number 25 sales in manga, because they're putting manga in there, is pretty high. To get to number 25 in actual American superhero comics, dude, you don't have to sell much at all. You could sell 10 ebooks and you'd be there. If you sold 150, you'd be like the bestseller right there. This is probably like a Marvel book, and there's not 25 Marvel books to read. so number 25, there's just no one on it. If you keep going down here, you can actually change the order of this list here. You'll see a bunch of these. Look at this one. Kindle, ebooks, comics, and manga and graphic novels. Graphic novels on sports. If you sold one copy, you'd be number one in this category. Let's check it out. Amazon bestsellers. Number one is Diary of a Super Spy. 3 more reps. Like this category, there's nothing in this category, guys. Professional wrestling, right? This one doesn't even have any reviews. Oh, no, it's not released yet. That's why. It's a pre-order, right? So there's only one review, and this one's number one, guys. Somebody sold a copy. Number one bestseller. These ones might not be on it because, hey, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 7 may not have sold a copy in like 3 years. So anyway, if you could be number one bestseller. Like what? I'm gonna click on it. Number one bestseller. Number one bestseller, guys. You got to get in on this sports graphic novels. You just got to sell one copy and you get that orange badge, bro. You're gonna get that orange badge with that one single copy of this graphic novel. So this is why this tool is so interesting, and also why the Amazon way of organizing things is so helter-skelter, man. Like I would look at this sports number one bestseller, and you can it probably sold more than one copy, but the only reviews from April. Great series. There you go. How much is it? $3.99. That's actually a good price. You can sell a couple copies at $3.99. Let's see if there's another one here. Let's see here. Martial arts manga. Boom. You could sell 4 copies, and like if you sell 4 copies a week, you're going to be at number one. Let's check it out. Record of the Wartenia War. I know nothing about this stuff. Here you go. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is on this one too. Avatar. Look at how few reviews are on here, guys. 5 reviews. Some of my books don't have 5 reviews because they're very popular. 5 reviews is not that hard to get. So you could probably get 5 reviews if you tried. I don't really try to get reviews. All my reviews are authentic, and that's kind of how I like it. So you can do this. You get on the list of number 1. Go to sales to number 1. That sports graphic novels. That's where you're gonna get that orange badge, guys. So there's authors anyway. There's authors who look at this and they're like, I want to write a bestseller. Now, the dude writing the number one bestseller in sports manga probably going to sell less copies than if you chose to write in a more popular genre, because this is too far on the tail. There's 2 people that are into this. You need more than that. If you're gonna target something that's geeky like steampunk, where people buy every single steampunk book that comes out, then you want whichever one has the biggest one. And there's some ways that you can try to find this using these categories. Let's see if we can go back. Let's go to a new category search. Let's take a look at science fiction and fantasy. Since I write in science fiction, and you could search the categories up here, and we'll just put in gay. All right, so here you go. Here's a category called lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender ebooks, science fiction and fantasy. You can see that you don't have to sell that many copies, and there's a big spread here down to 10,000. This is actually a fairly popular category for some reason, but you could try sexual abuse. There's like a sexual abuse category. Let me find it here. Probably under something else. There's a bunch of them that you're like, what? This is a thing. Yeah, lesbian, gay, and bisexual, transgender ebooks. Let's take a look at some of these. All right, 214. This is a really good one. So gay comics and manga, which is probably dominated by like yaoi stuff. Let's find out. Let's find out if it's a bunch of yaoi. Is it a bunch of yaoi? This may not even be a gay one here. So you can also try to get your book into categories it doesn't belong. I married my best friend to shut my parents up. Interesting. The Legend of Korra is in this. Okay. Here's a yaoi. There we go. Yaoi's not even in the top 5, man. How about that? These yaoi light novels. You don't even know my feelings. Oh, these are manga. These are actually the real deal. Some of these I think are not manga. They're books. A novel. It's not in the right category. You don't want to put your book in the wrong category, by the way. That can not be good. Beauty and the Beast Girl. Boy, this is an interesting category we're looking at here, fellas. Citrus. This one looks quite provocative as well. What did I have you look at on the stream? There's no way this is gonna get monetized now. Anyway, so you could see that these are pretty easy categories. Let's go back to science fiction and fantasy, and we'll take a look at some of these. Look at this one. Amazon bestseller rank of #1 in time travel is #3. So we're talking about the third bestseller on Amazon. That's a really tough category, but there's a lot of readers in it. The bestseller rank of 4,000 means that, like, look at this. You only really have to sell 5,000 copies to get to #1. But you only have to sell 50 to get on the list. That means that there's a big spread there. What you kind of want to see is a category that has really close numbers here. Like if you have the same number of sales to go from 1 to go like 25 to 1, that means there's a lot of people that are buying books between those numbers, and it's a good idea to hit that category versus just trying to get on the list or get to #1. Here we go. Activities, puzzles, and games, werewolf. There's no even sales ranks on this. But meanwhile, I just want to point out, there's no category for sci-fi horror. Like it doesn't exist. Anyway, let's take a look at a couple of other things. So you can go keyword search, and we can just type in, let's say you're writing let's do werewolves. I don't even have to spell word. Let's do something else. Vampires. All right. Oh, vampire. So these are keywords that you put in your part of your book publishing thing. You can analyze. It'll tell you like how competitive some of the stuff is. It's not working right now for some reason. Let's do a new search. Sometimes, this is special software, so it doesn't always work quite right. Let's try it again. There we go. Keyword search. Vampires. All right. Competitive score tells you that if you put vampires as your keyword, people searching for vampire, your book's going to be way down the list. So you might try Vampire Baby. Oh! Look at that competitive score, 13. However, there's not very many searches. So not very many people are looking for vampire books. Some people are buying the books. There's 1,400 people writing Vampire Baby books, but not a lot of people are searching for it. Let's see here. Vampires Battle. Oh, that one's easy. Look at that. 1,000 searches, 27. So I actually have a vampire book that'll come out hopefully this year, guys. Vampires versus Angels. It's very pulpy. And the funny thing is I say that and people are going to read it and be like, no, this is not pulp style at all. This is like literature. I'm like, no. But look at this. Vampires Battle. I'll just put that one in there. That's great. I'll dominate that. So when people type in Vampires Battle, they'll see my book and they'll click it. Let me just show you one that's interesting. Let's do a keyword search here. I'll do a new search. We're going to type in samurai fiction. You can see kind of what's going on here because I have a samurai fiction thing. And then from there, you can actually like go to a competition analyzer. Let's type in samurai fiction. So you'll see, here's a bunch of samurai fiction stuff that shows up. Occasionally you see, you would see my book in here somewhere because I've tried this with my book. But for whatever reason right now, it's not selling a ton of copies, and that's okay. So here's all the stuff that you could see. And you can go from here, like $3 in sales. That'll tell you how much. And you probably see mine and be like, $2 in sales. Woo! And you can see where this is, where all this stuff is sitting. And then it'll go down here. You can, here's this Musashi novel. Maybe check it out and see what's going on. We'll see some related books. They have an also vault section, whatever it's going to be. So if you're doing like an ad for, like if I was doing an ad for Muramasa, I might focus the ad around people who like who like this book or who are looking for this book, and then they'll see it down here somewhere in one of these sponsored products. You're actually not going to see it because I'm not running any ads on the book right now, but you get the idea. So you could kind of scope out the competition and see like how many people are active in that area. And so what a lot of authors do is they start doing all this before they write the book and just see if like they can sell anything in the book, sell anything in that area. So like if I do Muramasa, oh look, there it is. DY sales, monthly sales 15. It's I don't think it's been a good month for that book, I guess, but you get the idea. Some days there's a lot more sales. Age, that's how old it is. So this is an old book. It's been around forever. Bestseller rank 50,000. That's pretty low, right? That's like a book a day. So I'm not like super high on any kind of bestseller list or anything like that. But you get the idea where that stuff sits. And then down here, there's, another version of it. And some other random things that aren't even related. So this is not a strong keyword. Obviously, it's a keyword that works on my book, but it's probably not one that I would want to use if I were advertising, is to put the word Muramasa in there, thinking that I'm gonna attract readers that are interested in what I'm wanting to look at there. Okay, so hopefully that's a little bit of an interesting look at that piece of software. It's called Publisher Rocket, or it used to be called KDP Rocket. It's very interesting for looking at how this stuff works, looking at how the tails work on Amazon to decide where your book needs to be or where you want to write a book. Some people think of this stuff before they write a book. I don't. I just write the books I want to write, and if people want to read them, they can. And if they don't, that's okay too. So that's mainly what I look. Let me take a look at the chat a little bit, and then we'll finish up. If you guys want to look in the D&D box, this is an example of a product designed to evangelize normies. So I might do a video just kind of breaking this guy down, but if you guys want to look at it on stream, let me know in the comments. Let's see here. I'd recommend the books The Stories of Ray Bradbury and Bradbury Stories, 100 of his most celebrated tales, each of which contains different 100 stories. Yeah, good. He has a lot of stories, not just Fahrenheit 451. Which I think English teachers only liked it because it was about book burning, and they didn't really think very hard on the reality of it. How do you think? Is this okay to be a fan of a content creator instead of content itself, or to have such fans? And what do you think about your fans? Are they fans of you or the content? I think my fans are fans of me. I think it's fine to have fans of things and not fans of content. I'm a fan of Dark Throne as a band. Every album is different, and you don't know what to expect. That's fine. Same thing with Ulver. And I'm a fan even of Stephen King, and he writes in multiple different genres. So I think it's fine to be a fan of an artist rather than a genre, because there's more that goes into a genre, because a genre is defined by the tropes that are in it, not the writing style or the competency of the writer. Atomic Blonde versus New James Bond is basically what they converged successful IPs. Original stories featuring their ideas just aren't working. That's true. Yeah, that's why they have to capture the old IPs. And then once those are destroyed, they'd rather them be destroyed and there'd never be another James Bond movie than to sell the license and have people who actually like James Bond make a James Bond movie. That's another thing. What do you think of video game movies? Do you think that they could be successful? I know that Assassin's Creed and World of Warcraft didn't do very well, but what do you think? I think inherently they're going to be bad. It's because games are not about the story, they're about the gameplay. So the problem is when you make a video game adaptation, you have to adapt the game, which includes a bunch of things that aren't there for story purposes. They're there for aesthetic reasons, they're there for gameplay reasons, right? The fact that Mario's world is populated by turtles and Goomba monsters is because those were easy to draw. That's part of why they're there. Mario has a mustache so that you can see that he has a nose. This is why he originally had a mustache. So you end up with a bunch of things that don't really make a lot of story sense. Great stories in games are told through gameplay and can't really be easily divorced from the way that you interact with them. Great example is Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age Origins has a great story, but the way that you progress through the story and how you interact with characters and how you make decisions is what makes the story good, and it's what makes the story engaging. And putting that just in a movie where you have a sequence of events is not going to yield something that's nearly as interesting as the game. So gameplay is what makes the gaming experience what it is. It's what makes a game a game. It's what makes the art of the game. And if you can tell a story through that gameplay, that's great. But that also means that translating it to another medium is not going to work very well. Whereas a book to a movie, you're still dealing mostly with a sequential number, characters having dialogue and a sequential set of events that you can just do. So I don't think games translate well to movies at all. And I generally have very, very low faith of them ever being done correctly. I haven't watched the Prince of Persia one, actually, and I kind of want to watch that one because people say that one's actually good. Would you share if you've had any supernatural experiences? I tried studying the occult, Crowley magic, Kabbalah, demonology, and quickly developed symptoms that have gone since I ceased the research. That's interesting. That's hard to say, because what means supernatural? So I say God interacts with me in a way that's designed to interact with me, because I'm a highly rational person. And I'm a person that's very focused on cause effect and determining models for how the world works. So when I look at the outcomes of my life, and I've said this before, it's like none of the things which I did actions to get things, and all those things were taken away. And all the things I have were given to me via no action of my own. So what is God trying to convince me of with that? That the world is merely random? I don't think it's just that, though the world has lots of randomness in it, and randomness is not bad. But really, that the race is not to the swift nor the battle to the strong. Outcomes are not up to me. And that's a lesson you can only learn by understanding how to evaluate your life in that particular kind of way. As far as out-of-body experiences or things like that, not that many, and not so much. So I've had interesting experiences where, I've almost died. So I remember walking out of the Luxor years ago. It's a big casino in Las Vegas. It has a pyramid. And me and my friend were who I've had on the show, it's Matt, we're looking at the lights on the Luxor, and we're trying to decide if the lights cross like this as they go up and down, or if they just do this. Because you could see it either way. It was one of those things where you could see it both ways. And we stop, and this car races past this Mercedes, and we're walking across the street, and Matt, because of the way we're looking, I can't see this. And I can't hear it because I'm mostly deaf. He pulls me out of the street, and the car that had driven past us had put into reverse and driven backwards at 80 miles an hour in this parking lot and almost killed me. I almost got hit. He was completely oblivious to the fact that there were other human beings. And at that moment, I realized, I was like, what were we talking about again? It's we're talking about whether the lights do this. It's that seems really like a pointless and completely stupid conversation. So I've had these near-death experiences where, I could have died easily, right? And again, it's that, is everything random, or is it just that not everything's in my control? So at that moment, it's not in my control. You can't control everything, which has a particular effect for me with faith and understanding whether events are random or not, and how to deal with that randomness, and how to deal with things that aren't up to me. And that kind of informs a lot of my philosophy too, because things aren't up to me. It's I'm going to focus on doing the art that best expresses the ideas that I need to express. And it's really not up to me whether I'm successful. I can do the basic things that everybody does, but I know that there's a huge element of randomness in success. So I need to do what matters, and there's no reason to sacrifice my morals or ideals in anything I do, because the outcome is not up to me anyway. So I might as well be completely true. I might as well be completely honest. Now, going back to what you said, Jack, I've talked to multiple people who've had that experience. The guys in Black Sabbath have basically said that. Dave Mustaine has said that. Seems like there would be something to that if there's that many people who have that experience. And I don't think that there's a danger if you have faith, but I think the danger is there if you don't have faith, if that makes sense. Because if you have faith, you can walk into the realm of the enemy and know that you're safe. If you're trying to find God, you're not going to find him there. Some people go to bed with Lucifer and then they cry when they don't greet the day with God. And that's the reality of that. So that's my experience with it. What do you think of, let's see here. They issued me a copy of SST here at OCS, Starship Troopers. When I was a boy, I was all like, oh yeah, when I first read it. Now I'm a man and just cringe and frown. Yeah, I've heard that they do that, and I think it's because of some of the ideas that are in it. Like I said, it's mostly a book about the ideas, but I'm not a fan of the ideas. Oh yeah, people watch anime for the eyes. The eyes work. They're a hyper expressive thing. So the eyes are important for anime because anime comes across as more expressive than a lot of Western animation. They're not always. Did you ever read Don Quixote? I did, but it's a long time ago. And I remember enjoying it. I'd probably have to read it again if I wanted to do content on it. Is it unrealistic to say that a lot of classic sci-fi authors like Arthur C. Clarke, Carl Sagan, and Robert Heinlein appeal much more to geeks than normies? I don't think that's unrealistic to say. I think most of Robert Heinlein's stuff is kind of geeky. It's geeky in a way, though, that is different from how people think of it. People think of geeks as like knowing everything about science. It's geeky in that his social ideas are wacky and weird. The science in it is not that profound. Whereas, I don't know, hard sci-fi is kind of hard to talk about. Hard sci-fi is definitely geeky, but I think that Robert Heinlein is geeky for a different reason. It's because he was writing about weird ideas like polyamory and crap like that. Artist and writer Alexander Adams mentioned you in an interview. Yeah, I'll post a comment with the link and the links to the books that I recommend so you have access to them after the stream. Yeah, I heard that. He's the one that I picked up this idea of cultural entryism, or like the word cultural entryism, which is you enter into a culture specifically not because you're super interested in the culture, but to change that culture. And comics is an example of that. Do you watch or read My Hero Academia? I have not watched or read it. I can try it out. I don't have a lot of time. I can always watch some of it. The reason why I say that is because even though a lot of their books are highly regarded, I don't think a lot of normal readers know much about the sci-fi authors. I think you're correct. And it's why space opera is so big. It's big in books and it's big in movies because it just appeals to regular people. It's about the stories, not about big ideas. Like at its core, sci-fi traditionally is about big ideas and interesting ideas. That's what makes Starship Troopers interesting, is the ideas that are in it. I also think it's interesting when you look at those ideas from a critical lens and you're like, I don't think they're good ideas. And then also I made a second video on him where I'm like, there's kind of this Oedipus complex that runs through some of his books. It's a little weird. I think Heinlein was sexually kind of creepy. And that's all I'll say about it. I don't dislike his books, but I think he's kind of creepy with his views on sex. Working at a cinema means I can watch films for free. Let's just say that I'm glad that I didn't pay to watch the new Lion King. It's got nothing on the animated one. Absolutely, I agree. I know that that's going to be the case. What are some great sci-fi or science fantasy novels that are inspired by Lost in Space and Space Family Robinson, which are loosely based on the Swiss Family Robinson? I don't know. Do you like Gustave Doré's art? I don't think I know who he is. I probably have seen his art, but I'm not connecting. Not making a connection. Other people who know better about that stuff would know better how to talk about that. Do you think the prequels would be better off if they were animated films? Lucas has a strong creative vision, but it was held by CGI that doesn't look good with live action. I actually think the prequels have aged really well. I do think that I really like the cell animated Clone Wars series. I think it's really good. I love the way it looks. I love the story that it tells. I think in some ways it would have been better, but I don't think the CGI is bad in the prequels. I think it gets a bad rap. I'm not really sure why. But watching it in like a high definition screen, modern setting, it looks great. And it's not bad. How is canon defined when it comes to comics? For instance, are all Superman comics without direct input from Siegel and Schuster non-canon, even if they were? It's however you want it to work. I would say each version of Superman is whoever is writing that. It's their interpretation of Superman. So Superman is a super canonical idea, I would say, and it's this writer's version of Superman. It's this writer's version of Batman. It's this artist's version of Wolverine. Visually, whatever it's going to be, it's their version of it. It's their interpretation of an idea that's really above and outside that. So rather than thinking of it as non-canon, it's probably better to just think of these things as each one's a different interpretation. Now, here's what Jim Shooter said about it. He's like, if you ask 1,000 people to describe Superman, whatever those 1,000 people list, whatever all of those 1,000 people will list, that's essential to Superman. But if nobody mentions it, you can change it or get rid of it if you want to for your new version. So if nobody mentions the Fortress of Solitude, that's not really endemic. That's not really part of Superman. It can be separated from Superman. If nobody mentions the color of Wonder Woman's costume, which is what he mentions, you can change it. Like Wonder Woman was originally red, white, and blue, but then they changed her to like gold and something else. It's like, you can do that. Why not? Right? If people don't mention Wolverine's costume colors, you can change it. They know he has claws, he's hairy, says bub, maybe. I don't know. Although I think he maybe doesn't smoke as much as he used to. Speaking of anime, that is bonkers and out there. Look at the show Neon Genesis Evangelion. I want to see Muramasa Blood Drinker. Yeah, Neon Genesis, I'll check it out. I didn't get to see it back in the day, or only saw like one episode. I want to see Muramasa Blood Drinker, the anime. It would be cool, man. It'd be bloody. Are you interested in writing fantasy stories based on directly on existing mythology? For instance, one about Valkyrie or some other such mythical being? I could. My interest is low compared to my own mythology. What are your thoughts on Carl Jung's theories about archetypes? I think Carl Jung was a sorcerer and was into sorcery. And the more I read about him and his ideas, the more I think he was actually insane. So I don't place a lot of weight on it. I think that's a derivation of magic, not what's there. So when I talk about character archetypes, I'm talking about what people do, not some mystical, deep-seated psychological seed that all of these are expressions of. He's working backwards. I'm just describing what's there. I kind of think he's insane. And judging by what even other, I'm not a psychologist, but what psychologists tend to say about Carl Jung is like they think he was kind of bonkers too. Thoughts on Warhammer 40,000 in the books? I haven't read any Warhammer 40,000 books. I like the games, and I like the setting a lot, so I think it's cool. I love the idea of this emperor of mankind who's like being kept alive to hold open the warp. It's cool. It's a cool idea. Tragic. After the Horus heresy, I was told growing up that trends and fashions always come back around. We will see the return of traditional hand-drawn animation, but in new form through new art technology. I think so. I think the cyclical view of history is a better one than what we tend to view with like things being progress-oriented. And in Hollywood, you can see cycles. In the 60s, we had a cycle that's a lot like today, which is a lot of gimmicks to keep people in the theaters because they could watch TV at home. A a lot of just big budget, pulpy stuff. And then you got the 70s, which was focused on directors producing interesting art films. And then it went into the high concept thing in the 80s, and then we're back around to where we were in the 60s. In a noirish first-person detective story, how can you write another character talking about their experiences or involvement overall without it being a giant block of dialogue? I thought I answered that. If you're familiar with both of them, which of the following do you prefer? Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep or Ridley Scott's loose adaptation Blade Runner? I like the Blade Runner movie quite a bit, but it's correct to call it a loose adaptation. I like the story, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, probably better in the way that it does the ideas, but I love the movie too. I think of them as two different things. It's Ridley Scott's interpretation. It's his thoughts on it. It's not the same story really at all, and the themes in it are quite different as well. Because in Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, there's a religious sensibility based on like empathy and stuff. It's kind of weird. Jared says, if I'm going to make a sequel to something, I'd rather make an overall story to have multiple stories, to have a series of whatever I'm writing, even before I have the first one finished. Yeah, I think it's good to leave your options open. I'd like to see more fantasy literature about Vinland. Me too. Why not? Yeah. Vikings. Yo, getting a bit late. On the geek thing, most of the women I know who are nerds are into character interaction far more than overarching plot. I think men are more into character interaction. They just don't talk about it. They don't care as much about talking down the bad guy. They just want to know, or taking down the bad guy. They want to know if Hero A gets the girl, or if Girl 2 is going to get with Hero B. Men care about that too. But yeah, you're right. Women tend to care about relationship outcomes more. Let's see here. Regarding my question about whether you'd be interested in writing 1930s pulp-style heroes, I was referring to creating new characters, not using existing ones. Oh yeah, I mean, it's always an influence. You brought up the Earthsea series. They actually made a Ghibli anime film called Tales from Earthsea. I am not aware of it. As a comic nerd and inspiring comic author, I agree with your Comics and Normies videos. The writing got sloppy, and the only people that stayed were people that were really invested, like me. It's true. Everyone judges everybody else today, even though we're all supposed to be accepting each other now. What's your favorite style? Oops. What's your favorite style or subgenre of metal? Power metal. What makes it your favorite? Melody, virtuosity, memorability, variety. Power metal has more of those things than any other genre. So power metal has stuff that is more extremely virtuosic. Vocals are more virtuosic than anything else, even like death metal. It's got more, because you can have interesting death metal riffs in a power metal song. So it's got better virtuosity. It's got better melody, which means it's more memorable. I like the lyrics better, right? You can only do so many variations on a theme of Cookie Monster stuff. Right, even if you're Chuck Schuldiner, it's tough. So power metal is probably it. Has the most variety too. You can have the biggest variety of stuff of any of the metal genres. Hopefully, I will become a lawyer someday. Since lawyers need to be careful reader and careful writer, that improved my ability to be a possible novelist. A lot of them were. Do you agree with Hitchcock's assertion that exposition is a pill that must be sugar-coated? Yes. Well, it depends. It depends. For the most part, yeah. Because in a movie, too much exposition really drags it down. I tried watching Into the Spider-Verse. What a slow first act. Especially stuff we've seen. So sometimes it's good to space that stuff out, or just really in a confrontation with some bad guy where you can't get outside help. So any of the spaghetti westerns do that in an almost fantastical sense. If you look at American westerns like Open Range is primarily about a conflict, a personal conflict. So it really all starts with the personal conflict. There's somebody who wants to exploit something, and there's somebody whose morals will not allow them to turn a blind eye, and so they must act. That's Open Range. Tombstone, it's the same thing. The Earps come to Tombstone wanting to make a fortune, but what they find there is depravity, and they must actually resist it. So even though they don't want to be moral people, they're forced to because of their innate nature. And then they have to fight the bad guys. That's Westerns. And they just happen to exist in the American West. You can write a fantasy Western that takes place in a fantasy world that has all of those elements. That would actually be quite good. In fact, so the sequel to Muramasa, if I ever write it, where did I put that book? The sequel to Muramasa, if I ever write it, here it is, will probably be a Western, but in Japan, and nobody will realize it's a Western. Because the story I have in mind is actually a Western, and believe it or not, a lot of the Japanese samurai movies of the past, which I really enjoy, are actually very close to Westerns, but they just take place in feudal Japan instead of the Old West. But you have, a bad feudal lord who's acting like a crime boss. You have somebody who's oppressing those who can't be helped, and you have an honorable wandering warrior who must actually, because of his code of honor, must actually act against the wickedness. Bob, outcomes are not up to me. Non nobis domine, sed nomine tuo de gloriam. Yeah. It's not my will, it's thy will. I think traditional animation is truly magical and will always stand the test of time, while CGI will always remain dated the year it's made. That is a great point. So Darkspawn makes a really good point. You see CGI from, like, if you watch Spawn, the Spawn movie, the CGI in it's awful. But when it came out, it was considered good. So CGI tends to look dated because you're always chasing the detail of a real object. You're always trying to make the CGI object as organic and real as imagine trying to CGI a book. God, that would be hard. Like this. Good luck CGIing that, but you can animate it. Whereas animation, because it represents reality and isn't trying to literally be reality, it's always going to be timeless. Have you read any of William Gibson's cyberpunk novels? I don't think I have. I've read John De La Rosa's, though, and they're fun. They're good young adult. Good adventures, good characters. I have a hard time. He kind of fell into steampunk. He decided to write a steampunk novel, and people liked it, so he kept writing it. I have a hard time reading for anything longer than 10 minutes at a time. Do you offer your books in audio form? You can read Garamesh for free. I mean, you can hear that one for free on YouTube or buy the Audible book. I will have audiobooks in the future, but it's an investment thing because it takes a lot of hours to record them or a lot of money to pay someone to record them. So it takes a very long time to recover that investment. So eventually they'll happen, but I don't sell so many books that I look at audiobooks as I'm losing money. I'm not losing money by not having audiobooks. I'd be losing money by having them. So eventually they'll happen, but it's going to be well. Speaking of Radbury, it drives me up a wall whenever I recommend Fahrenheit 451 and people think I'm talking about Michael Moore. Yeah. It's normies, dude. It's cool. They don't remember having it. They read the Cliff's Notes in high school because public school taught them that reading is a horrible experience that no one wants to do. Will you review Blade Runner in honor of Rutger Hauer's recent passing? I didn't know he died. I didn't know about that. I can talk about it. I really do like it. Do you think the Disney live-action craze will last long enough for them to get into the sequel territory? I think it'll burn out, but there will be some sequels. I think it'll burn out, but there will be at least be a couple sequels. Would you ever write an epic science fantasy space opera novel? Absolutely. I will. I probably will at some point. Not today. So I'm working on the next Eternal Dream book, and also I need to finish this vampire novel. So those two will come out, and then it'll be pretty open. If people want, I mean, This has space fantasy elements, sci-fi horror. If people really like this, I'll write sequels to this as well. There's a lot more story to tell when you get to the end of this. You'll realize that. In one of your videos, you mentioned Wagner's opera cycle, The Ring of the Nibelungs. In the context of fantasy, mythology, and world building, what's your opinion of it as a work of art? I love Wagner in general. Ring of the Nibelungs in particular, even though it's perhaps too expansive an experience. It's not as accessible, say, like Flying Dutchman. But man, it's really cool. I really like it. In fact, I may try to look up some more performances of it, because I've really only listened to it and seen parts of it staged. But back in the day, you couldn't get a 12-hour opera. It wasn't a thing. I think it's great. Yeah, it's awesome. I never knew Young was into sorcery. That kind of makes me re-question a bunch of Jordan Peterson stuff. I think Jordan Peterson's into sorcery too, in a way. Like this kind of Aleister Crowley type belief in like magic and sex magic and stuff. It's weird, you know. It's weird. The more I knew about Young, the more I reevaluated Jordan Peterson too. Jordan Peterson tends to cloak what he says in a lot of things that make sense. But then there's there's always like a deeper line there to something that isn't, it's more magical. The stream kept starting and buffering, and you may want to do something about this Rick Sullivan guy. He keeps making comments about Jews and things, and it seems to be making people mad. Oh, yeah, I'm only paying attention to the comments that are in orange. So, yeah, let's just do that. We'll get rid of that, because you're attacking me when you do that. When you do that kind of stuff. The stream cut out right after you mentioned Spider-Verse and started again as you mentioned spaghetti westerns. It looked normal on my end, so I'm sorry that it interrupted. Someone's probably doing something on the network somewhere. All right, I apologize for that, but basically, Into the Spider-Verse had too much exposition, especially stuff we haven't seen. Spaghetti westerns, basic ideas. You have like a samurai, same idea. You have a guy who has a code of honor who can't turn away from injustice. That's the basic setup. Please review books by Albert Camus if you can soon. Let's see here. Daddy Angry, banhammered law. I don't care. Like, I don't, if you, so this is the thing. If people are trying to talk about red pill stuff and they don't realize what that does, or you don't know where to talk about it, then you're not really red pilled. I think I have to believe that like you're a plant or just an idiot. You ever find time to look at the Lego project? Yes, but you should send it to me again. It was a hard buffer. Sorry about that. I'm sorry if there's interruptions. Anyway, we're out of time today. So let me... one more recommendation. There's a Boulez production from 1976. The guy who plays Wotan, Donald McIntyre, is particularly awesome. Yeah, I mean, I can look up the Pierre Boulez version. I'm a fan of Pierre Boulez, even though he's very postmodern, because he just does such different weird stuff all over the place. Boulez conducting Webern is one of the best versions of Webern that you're going to find. So I do recommend his Webern versions are really good. If you like Webern's music, and I actually do, even though it's very modern. Most people aren't going to like Webern, but I do. I like it. All right. So thanks so much for watching, guys. I'm probably going to have to tie it up here. Hopefully this has been interesting for you and been a little bit informative as far as how some of this stuff works with marketing, with looking towards the long tail or the short tail, whether you want to go towards a really big genre that has a lot of people in it, or you want to go to a small one that is easy to dominate and easy to capture readers within that small genre. That's up to you. Let's see if there's anything else. Thanks for everything. All right, peace out. I really appreciate it. You guys can find my books they're all on Amazon. Sign up for my mailing list at dbspress.com. I'm going to look at this probably later in the week. So look for this video. We'll take a look at this, and we're going to evaluate this as a tool to get people into something. Right away, I'll tell you what I like about this, and that there's no Wizards of the Coast branding on it. I'm not a fan of Wizards of the Coast as a company, and I would love to have a Hasbro, even though it's a big corporation, take that away from Wizards of the Coast, because Wizards of the Coast has been converged and Hasbro still answers to stockholders. So I would love to see if they do a good job providing something that a newbie, a normie, can actually get into with this D&D starter set. And this could perhaps, depending on whether I think it's good, guide more starter sets. I think if you wanted to launch your own RPG, you start with a starter set and then you can sell the additional stuff. So you like crowdfund the starter set with a couple of cool miniatures and then let people go from there. I think I'm all into cheap and accessible. Thanks, Dave. Say a prayer for me that the stuff I tapped into goes away. I will, and I hope others will as well too. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Newest book is Voices of the Void. You can still get it for free. Crown of Sight is the newest fantasy book. So make sure you're on my mailing list and you'll get that stuff, hopefully for free. And I'll see you guys next time.